good to be here today in this month of Elul as we are marking this spiritual pilgrimage towards Rosh Hashanah in our period of teshuvah, of reflecting and returning. And I want to talk today about the question of who goes first. Who goes first when we're thinking about an apology being offered, an apology being received? There's tension in a relationship. There's repair that needs to be done. And sometimes we can feel that internally inside of our bodies resisting, right? Like, no, I'm not going to be the one to reach out. They should reach out, right? Like, they're the ones who did something wrong. I'm not, why should I have to initiate that conversation? This is for me, a very human, internal conversation that happens, and also, I guess, intensifies at this time of the year as I reflect on who are the individuals in my life, in my community, whom I need to approach. I need to figure out how to make tikkun, to make some repair in the relationship. And so this question is informed by, or we can shed some light on this question through a text brought from the Hebrew Bible. And thank you to Rachel for holding our text space and for sharing the source sheet. As always, if you don't have access to this visually, I'm going to read what the texts are on the sheet. So in the prophets we read, turn back to me. This is God speaking, the divine speaking. Just turn back to me and I'll turn back to you, right? So in a sense, through the prophet's words here, we're kind of having a very clear path of where God says to us, you need to take the first step back, and then I'll follow, right? So I want to bring this beautiful text by Rabbi Mordechai of Lechovitz, and one of our great Hasidic teachers. And again, thank you to Mark and to IJS for this beautiful text, because this first came to me through the clergy leadership program that I participated in with IJS. And I keep coming back to these texts over and over and over as a treasure trove of inspiration and wisdom. So it starts with a bit of a story meant to be taken as a metaphor. Our teacher says to us, think of it this way when we think of this verse. The king's daughter was taken captive by brigands and stolen far away from the palace. If she tried to return alone, her tiny steps would hardly bring her closer. And when would she finally return home to her father? So the king sent a message. I too wait for your return. But so long as you do not begin to return, I can't come any nearer to you. But if you begin to return with your tiny steps, I will do the same in response, and I will draw nearer with my great power and my long steps, and we will very quickly be reunited. And our teacher concludes here, that's the sense of when we read this verse, turn back to me. Turn back to me even with your limited capacities, right? Even with that tiny first step. And then I will turn back to you with great love. So one of the amazing things about this text is it underscores for me the unknown, that when we initiate, when we make that overture, when we reach out, we actually have no idea how things are going to unfold. We really have no idea of the possibility of that great love expanding in that space when we take that one tiny step forward. We don't know. It might not turn out that way. We also don't know, right? But that tiny step is a risk for us, but it's also a risk that could potentially pay great dividends for us, because we never know what kind of love can unfold when there's been this tear, when there's been this gap that's occurred in a relationship, right? And we're taking that first step across the chasm, just that tiny step. And so this metaphor of the king and the king's daughter is meant to kind of encourage us to do that. The example is between the divine and a human being here, but certainly it's certainly applicable to the relationship between two human beings. I also want to lift up that in this story and in the roles, right, there's an asymmetry. There's an asymmetry in the traditional idea of God and between the traditional idea of God and us. There's asymmetry between the king, who has more power in the story, and the daughter, who has perhaps less. And that asymmetry also exists in our relationships, right, in varying degrees. We may feel that when we're approaching someone to make a repair, we may be very aware of that asymmetry, that sense of they have more power than I do. I feel smaller than they do. And we may not. It may be more of an equal sense in our internally for us in our relationship with this person. So I want to name that because I don't think the asymmetry needs to necessarily trip us up in terms of what the essential metaphor is to give us the courage to take a first step, and then to open ourselves up to what can unfold. So we're going to bring this sense into our sit today, into our bodies. Maybe one image you might want to carry with you into your sit today is, what does it look like when I take that tiny step? And can I also lift up that tiny step to be really good and good enough, right? To not disparage ourselves, saying, well, that won't really matter, or will they even notice, or, all the things that we might say internally that would sabotage the our efforts to take that first tiny step. So our path, into that can be through our breath. If that's accessible to you, it can be through touching your legs, being aware of your pelvis on the seat. Thank you, Rachel, for intuiting to take the text down. I appreciate that. Um, it can be through any kind of anchor that is available to you. What does it look like to return? What does it look like to take a tiny step towards repair? So we'll sit for about 15 minutes or so, and then I'll bring us back together with the sound of my voice singing. And there are some English words that I'll share in the chat so that you have those words as well to join in your own Zoom room as we move towards the conclusion of our sit. Yai dai da dai, yai dai da dai, ya dai 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 dai. Da da da, yai da da, ya dai 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 dai. Yeah, 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 yeah. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return to who you are, return to what you are. Return to where you were born and reborn again.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Susan Leider, for again a beautiful teaching, perfect for this second week of the month of Elul. And friends, we seal the practice as we do each day, inviting everybody to stay present for a little bit longer, for a few more moments, please, so that those who are in mourning, observing your site, can join in the mourner's Kaddish. And if you're not reciting Kaddish, you can support those who are with your compassion and prayers for comfort. If you're reciting Kaddish, I invite you to join me by rising in body and spirit. And after that, I will sound the shofar, as is our custom throughout the month of Elul. Can unmute if you're reciting Kaddish at this time. Yitgadal.
Shemei Rabbah.
Yamah
Divrach Divrite V'Yamlich Malchutei.
Chonu
V'Yomechonu Hayed Chol Beit Yisrael. Lav Yisman Karim Meru. Amen. Shalom Barach Shabach Ar V'Yitman V'Yitnaseh Dar V'Yitmalel V'Yithalal Shemei Dichusha Rechu Ela Birchata Mishpachata Nechemata Biran V'Yama Yehi Shlama Rabba Shemaya Aleinu V'Yahol Yisrael Amen. Oseh Shalom Rama Aseh Shalom Aleinu V'Yal Yisrael V'Yal Yoshvei Tevel Yimru Amen.
Imru. Amen. Again, thanks as always to Rachel Hugot for holding our Tech Mishkan, our sanctuary, beautifully, and thanks to our teacher today, Rabbi Susan Leider. I neglected to mention when introducing Susan, though you did mention as an alum of our clergy leadership program at IJS, and also this year as visiting rabbi at Congregation Beth Jacob in Redwood City, California. We're blessed to have you visiting this year. And everyone's invited, as always, to join in the conversation. You can do so in the chat. You can ask questions if you'd like, and I will try to work your question into the conversation. So if you have a question, please preface it by writing, oops, hold on. Better? I forgot to turn my original sound off. Still perfecting this Zoom thing. So please add your questions if you like. Preface it by writing a question. I'll try to work it in. And also, if you're leaving us now, just going to let you know that hope you'll join us tomorrow. Our teacher will be Rabbi Daniel Raphael Silverstein, joining us from Israel, from Applied Jewish Spirituality. And Friday, we'll sit in the Shabbat with Alison Cohn. Susan, thank you so much, as always. I love that teaching. And I think what I love about it so much is that it feels so simple and accessible. And it, here's what it does for me. I'd be interested to hear your reflection on it. My default assumption is that in order to generate a response of return to me, I need to take a big step. I need to, that there will only be a big step in response to a big step from me, whether it's interpersonal or with the divine or even in meditation. I want to talk a little bit about how this works in meditation. But I find it so comforting and powerful that to have a reminder on all levels that all we need to do is take a tiny step, whatever that might be. And that can break us out of paralysis, of procrastination, in general, right? Oh no, I have to get this whole thing done. Say like, no, just a tiny step. Makes me think about in 12-step programs, of course, where recovering addicts are encouraged to consider to frame things as just making it through one day at a time rather than, oh my God, I have to stay sober for the rest of my life. But the advice is say, just, can you stay sober for today? Or can you stay sober for the next minute or whatever, to break it down. So basically to say, like, if you can take a tiny step, very large things can happen. And all you need to do is take a tiny step. So I was thinking about that in terms of the meditation, when, as with everyone, of course, my mind will wander off and I'll start thinking about whatever I'm thinking about or whatever's on my, whatever's percolating, or whatever's weighing on me. It's like, oh no, I'm way off course. I'm way out there. Like I'm totally lost. And this teaching and your guidance today was really about, all you need to do is take a little step and that can change everything. So, in short, what it helps me notice is that I have this assumption that a tiny step is not enough. And then it's a reassurance that's like, no, that's all that's needed is a tiny step. So how about for you? How does that work for you?
Yeah, so perfectionism, right, really came to mind when I was listening to what you were saying, right, is to not let perfectionism be the enemy of the good, right? So just, yeah, take a partial approach, take a small approach, a tiny step. A couple of things happened to me, so I'm grappling with a kind of a big, audacious, hairy, challenging situation of teshuva in my life with an individual. And I've been thinking about the tiny steps. And so this time helped me think about another source of support I could go to for kind of spiritual guidance on this, to go back to the person directly, ultimately. But that was like, oh, here's a different tiny step that I hadn't thought of. Oh, that's accessible. I can do that. And that can give me strength to move forward with the person. But then another thing happened is another tiny, smaller example came up in my life of like, I think I may have hurt this person with something I said in a conversation a while, over the summer. And I'm like, oh, that I can take that tiny step to talk. She's very pretty. So it's kind of like, oh, wow, there's some low-hanging fruit right in front of me. I was reflecting on this bigger, challenging situation, which still needs attention and still needs tiny steps. But then I also had this other thing dropped into my lap through the sit, and I may not have been in touch with that had I not slowed down enough to just let it sink in a little bit.
Yeah. There's a really interesting observation by Ilan in the chat. who wrote that he's struck by the contrast of this teaching, this verse in Malachi with the closing line in the Book of Lamentations, also known as Hecha, which we read on Tisha B'Av, where the initiative is, we put the initiative on God, return to us, Yud He Vav He, and we will return. And Elon writes, we cycle between standing and requesting the divine return to us first and insisting that we have to take the first step. So what do you make of that paradox?
That's the internal, I don't know, perhaps this Hasidic text came up in response to that biblical text, the interpretation of this particular verse from Malachi. Yeah, I think we go back and forth all the time, depending on our mood, depending on how hard things are, depending on maybe how angry we are. If we're holding anger and like that feeling of, I'm not going to go first, right? So clearly that's an emotion that I have felt because I've mentioned it several times today. I'm not claiming that's for everybody, but yeah, I think it's going back and forth, Mark, between those tensions in Jewish life.
A little slight tangent, but I see in the chat also there's a question about good Jewish 12-step Zoom groups, and one resource that I think people should know about if they don't already is a Facebook group called Our Jewish Recovery, which is, and there are many others, of course, but that's one I might suggest to people to check out. The other thing I thought about, Susan, and I imagine you might know this midrash, but I love this as a midrash, which I find a really good Jewish a good traditional grounding for Jewish mindfulness is the midrash about what happened to Moses at the burning bush, where the Torah says he turned aside to look at the sight, and only after he turned aside that he heard the voice calling from the burning bush. And the midrash is really exploring, well, how much did he actually turn? Like, did he do a 180 to turn around? And there's this beautiful midrash that says, no, he just turned his neck slightly. All he had to do is, it's in keeping with this teaching. He just needed to, that once the divine quote unquote saw that he just was inclined to turn a little bit, that was enough, and there's also, as you know, like all these beautiful verses and teachings about like, just give me the eye of a needle and I'll expand it, that the gates are always open. So I just love that our tradition has this sense of you don't have to do it all. It doesn't have to be so big. It can be a small step. Just open yourself a little bit. And this applies interpersonally, but I think let's go to the meditation practice because I think it's very easy for us to feel like failures in meditation because of our distractibility, etc., or some kind of sense of perfection we have to have, right? But actually, the practice, as I've learned it, is this kind of constant practice of drifting away and returning, drifting away and returning. And what you're adding to it today is, the returning doesn't have to be a 180. Even the returning could be just a tiny step, just like, oh, I've distracted. Oh, I've moved away. Oh, I can come back. Just turn a little bit, take a little step. And that applies in the meditation as a practice for the interpersonal stuff that you were also describing about, like, well, they owe me an apology, right? Like it was 80% their fault, right? And so I see that as connected. What do you think?
Yes. And there is something else that just flew in and flew out with that. Oh, yes, as it does, is for me, first of all, when I meditate, I don't actually, I sit, but I don't restrict my body movement. So like I started out with my hands on my legs today. And then I started thinking about this place in the Machzor in our High Holy Day prayer book. And Mark, you might be able to think about I think it's in the repetition of the Amidah, our morning standing prayer. But it talks about the divine knowing our insides. It's a tremendous metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And Is that where it's from, Mark? That section, whatever. But it's in the
Search.
Mox.
Right, right. Um,
And
I'm gonna get it.
okay, no worries. But so when I thought of this, my hands moved actually from my legs somehow. I don't know why or how, kind of to my back, like
Mm.
where my kidneys are. And I started kind of feeling my breath expand from my back. And I don't know, I went into that metaphor, like, but really somatically and physically, like, oh, what other places in my body right now is kind of the opportunity for teshuva, like there, and I might not be aware of it because the divine knows my internal being, my internal space. So I just offer that as an example because I don't berate myself for. I just, the thought comes in, the thought goes out. I move my hands. I have a different type of physical awareness that also deepens, like, again, this understanding of Shuva, like where is it hiding? This wasn't the metaphor for today, but like where are the opportunities hiding in my body that I can surface through meditation. So disclaimer, I move during meditation.
That's really great. Um, um, well, I'm on one thread thinking about that passage from the Mach story. Then I'm going to, Habochen Habavot, the one who searches the heart, searches the inner parts, which is a nice connection with Dorothy's meditation yesterday. But I do want to address one question. I think there are a couple of questions in the chat about owing an apology and the issue about something being too late to apologize for, um, or one's been holding on to it for long. And I wonder if you have any suggestions for people who have this sense of it's too late to apologize. There's too much water under the bridge, and how this tiny step theology plays into that.
So I credit my teacher, Reb Mimi Feigelson, with this concept, this teaching of that. On one hand, we have this incredible cycle, right, of Rosh Hashanah coming every year, and the cycle of Tshuva, and then the beginning of the month of Elul, and those days in that month going through Rosh Hashanah all the way to Sukkot, right, is this great cycle of Tshuva. But sometimes what it does is it creates a false perception that we have to run on that schedule.
Mhm.
And so one of the things she taught me was that there is some tshuva that does not fit in that cycle. It doesn't. It's not going to be complete. It's not going to be ready. It's not going to be tied up in a neat bow. But a lot like the Mishnah teaches us, right? It's not upon you to complete it, but you need to engage, right? So I think part of it is what are these tiny steps that we're taking without knowing that that resolution is possible or that resolution will happen by the kind of quote traditional end of the season of tshuva that happens, in the days following Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
I find that a very powerful teaching because we are appreciative of our cycles, and also not everything fits into the cycle, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, well, we're at time. Lots of really good stuff in the chat. This was extremely
Yes.
generative, and as always, like right on point, Susan. Thank you so much, as always, for your consistent support in all forms, and especially through your teaching and presence on our sits. Lots of gratitude I see in the chat as well. So thanks to you. Thanks to Rachel for holding our space today. Thanks to each and every one of you for being here. And we hope to see you tomorrow. Practice with Rabbi Daniel Raphael Silverstein, which is always a treat, joining us from Israel. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Until then, be safe and well. Many blessings, everyone. Take good care.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Mark.